Mr. President, and I say to the distinguished manager and senator from Maryland, I'll be glad to interrupt my amendment upon the return of the senator from Alabama if he wishes to speak, and then continue after that. And I thank the senator from Maryland for her hard work and excellent explanation of the legislation before the Senate. Mr. President, this amendment would lower Americans' health care costs immediately. It would provide access to safe, less expensive imported prescription drugs. For far too long, powerful lobbyists from the pharmaceutical industry have stood in the way of Americans' access to affordable imported drugs. Their enormous political campaign contributions made in return for political support of their agenda, and their secret, unsavory deal with the White House in exchange for their support of the health care reform have further contributed to the American people being prevented from accessing cheaper prescription drugs. Instead, Americans continue to pay 60% or higher for the same prescription drugs that are sold in Canada. This amendment is necessary because Americans need access to lower-cost drugs now. They need it now due to these difficult economic times. We all know about unemployment. American salaries are being cut. Household budgets are slim. Millions of Americans are struggling to make their monthly mortgage payments. For these reasons and so many more, Americans should not be forced to wait another day to purchase safe and affordable prescription drugs from outside the United States. But while Americans all over the country are having to choose between their next meal and their necessary prescriptions, the large pharmaceutical companies continue to pressure Congress to delay consideration of any legislation to allow the importation of safe and lower-priced prescription drugs. Now, I'd like to also point out that this is legislation on an appropriations bill, something that I have long opposed and still oppose. But there's been an unusual process taking place, and that process is one which has forced me to come to this situation, because on two separate occasions, the Majority Leader of the United States Senate assured me that legislation would be taken up before the Senate, and both times has changed his mind. The Majority Leader resisted consideration of amendment to allow for the importation of prescription drugs during debate on the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act. At the time, the Majority Leader said on the floor, quote, "This is something that should have been done, I'm sorry to say, years ago, not weeks ago. If this issue is important and legislation on the issue should have been done years ago, then why wasn't it brought up for consideration immediately after the tobacco bill in June?" While a standalone bill to allow importation, the S-1232 bill was placed on the Senate's calendar on June 11th, 2009, there's been no further effort by the Majority Leader to call it up for consideration. Instead, he sent me a letter stating, quote, "I am committed to take up legislation that would permit the safe importation of lower-cost prescription drugs, quote, as soon as practicable." The practicable time was back in June. There's no practical reason to prevent the Majority Leader from calling up this bill for a vote at any time. So, I was told verbally by the Majority Leader as short a time as 3 weeks ago that upon the completion of consideration of the Defense Appropriations Bill, that this legislation would be brought to the floor. Then, a week later, I was told, no, that's not going to be the case. So I've been waiting for as soon as practicable, and so have millions of Americans looking for cheaper alternatives to the high-priced prescription drugs. The Majority Leader also stated in his letter, quote, "If this issue is not addressed during the full Senate's consideration of comprehensive health reform, I guarantee that I will move to proceed to S-1232 before the end of the year." The Majority Leader of the Senate assured me that it would be taken up after completion of the Department of Defense Appropriations Bill, which we have completed. Given the fact that it's possible that the health care reform bill will be brought up under a truncated, pressured timeline, I have little faith that real in-depth consideration of prescription drug import legislation will come about. Therefore, I have no choice but to bring this issue up today as an amendment to this appropriations bill. In the 2008 election cycle, pharmaceutical companies gave almost $30 million in campaign contribution to members of Congress. Just this year, according to an article published in The Hill, the prescription drug industry has given more than $1 million to Republicans and Democrats. And the companies whip up their protectors in Congress each time we bring forward legislation to help Americans get the imported prescription drugs they need. Earlier this year, I read an email sent by the top lobbyist for the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, known as PhRMA, which stated, quote, this was back in June, "The Senate is on the bill today. Unless we get some significant movement, the full-blown Dorgan or Vitter bill will pass. We're trying to get Senator Dorgan to back down, calling the White House and Senator Reid. Our understanding is that Senator McCain has said he will offer regardless. Please make sure your staff is fully engaged in this process. This is real," unquote. That was an email from the lobbyist of PhRMA, who has given millions and millions and millions in campaign contributions. Well, guess what? In the immortal words of Jack Nicholson, I'm back. I'm back on the Senate floor, trying to help millions of Americans who have lost a job or struggling to put food on the table by giving them the opportunity to save on their prescription drugs immediately. Recently, the White House struck a deal with a pharmaceutical company to further protect its profits. The deal was bragged about by the head of the company's trade association, who cashed in for millions of dollars once he wrote the Medicare prescription drug benefit legislation as a congressman. He was quoted in an article in the New York Times published August 6, 2009, stating that the White House, quote, wanted a big player to come in and set the bar for everybody else, unquote. The same article stated, quote, Mr. Tozan said the White House had tracked the negotiations throughout, assenting to decisions to move away from ideas like the government negotiation of prices or the importation of cheaper drugs from Canada. The $80 billion in savings would be over a 10-year period. Mr. President, analyze that comment by the head lobbyist of one of the most powerful lobbies in Washington. He is saying that the White House agreed to move away, in other words, not support ideas like government negotiation of prices. Government negotiation of prices is absolutely necessary. We do it in the prescription drug bill, and it has reduced costs. In other words, that pharmaceutical companies would have to compete for Medicare contracts. One would think that's an obvious solution to bringing down costs. And the second, of course, the importation of cheaper drugs from Canada. Here, everybody's talking about reducing health care costs, and we know that importation of less expensive drugs would save health care costs for the American consumer. But the White House, apparently, according to Mr. Tozan, agreed that they would not support importation of less expensive drugs from Canada. Remarkable comment. You know, and people wonder why the Tea Parties are going on, why the approval rating of Congress is so low. Amazing. The Fraser Institute found in 2008 that Canadians paid on average 53% less than Americans for identical brand name drugs. Specifically, the Institute found that the most commonly prescribed brand name drug, Lipitor, is 40% less in Canada. Crestor is 57% less in Canada, and the popular arthritis drug, Celebrex, is 62% less expensive in Canada. Americans would love a 60% off coupon for prescription drugs and deserve such a discount now more than ever. I've been working on this issue for many years, and I will continue to do so. Americans should not have to wait a day longer for relief from higher prices for drugs. Inexplicably, the majority leader keeps delaying consideration of this needed legislation, which has now forced me to offer an amendment on the current appropriations bill. However, I feel it's necessary to protect all Americans' interests in obtaining affordable prescription drugs. The amendment states that no funds can be used to prosecute those who seek to import prescription drugs that have been approved by the FDA. If the big drug companies are getting an $80 billion savings, shouldn't we give a savings to American consumers? Why not now? Now, Mr. President, again, I want to say that there's going to be a point of order raised on this bill, and with righteous indignation, people are going to say it doesn't belong on an appropriations bill. We just finished a defense appropriations bill loaded, and I'll have a list of them, of unauthorized appropriations on that bill. Every appropriations bill that we take up has unauthorized appropriations ranging from $300,000 for a museum in Nebraska to the addition of C-17s to $2.5 billion. So the argument that somehow we shouldn't be taking up this legislation on this bill flies in the face of what has been common practice around here, even though I don't agree with it. And let me say this too. If I had full and complete confidence that this amendment would get a full and complete airing as an amendment on the health care bill, I will be glad to withdraw this amendment. I will be glad to withdraw this amendment if we have assurance that this amendment will be taken up on the health care bill. There's all kinds of things that are going to be done in passage of the health care reform legislation, so-called, on the floor of the Senate. So I see my friend from North Dakota here. I appreciate his efforts for a long time. He and I have been working on this for a long, long time. And it's a fact that I received the word of the majority leader that this bill would be taken up, and that has not happened. And it's happened twice. And I must say it's never happened to me before in the years that I have been a member of the United States Senate. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the New York Times article of August 6, 2009, White House affirms deal on drug cost, be entered into the record.
Without objection.
I also ask unanimous consent that the letter from Senator Reid to Senator Snowe, Senator Dorgan, and to me be entered in the record at this time as well.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I yield the floor. I want to say again, we have been told time after time that this legislation would come before the Senate. It has not. I do not know what process the majority leader will use. Reconciliation, fill up the tree, vote on cloture, make this amendment non-germane. I have no confidence. If I have the confidence that this amendment will be taken up in a regular order fashion and the full Senate vote on it, on the health reform bill, I will have some confidence that we can get it done. In the absence of that, Mr. President, I will seek a vote on this amendment. And if there's a budget point of order on this amendment, let no one be fooled. It's not because that they don't want to violate the budget rules of the Senate, because they violated in every possible way in previous appropriations bills to the tune of billions of dollars. So, Mr. President, I yield the floor.